The wind carried the scent of an incoming storm and horse sweat a good half hour before the riders crested the main drag. Silas knew that smell. It was the scent of trouble, bored and looking for a distraction in a godforsaken town at the foothills of the Rockies. The forge was thick with heat, shadows, and a rhythmic, ringing chime. Silas brought the heavy iron hammer down on the anvil, striking a shower of orange sparks from a red-hot horseshoe. He was 50, but the miles on him showed older. His face, carved with deep lines, looked like a dried-up riverbed, and his hands, covered in scars and ingrained soot, resembled the gnarled roots of an old oak. For the past 7 years he had just been Silas, the sullen blacksmith of Red Creek, a town slowly dying since the silver vein pinched out. 7 years of forging plowshares, shoeing horses, and fixing wagon axles. 7 years of trying to deafen the ghosts of his past with the ringing of his hammer. He plunged the cooling metal into the water barrel with his tongs. The water hissed, spitting out a cloud of white steam. At that moment, the jingle of spurs on the boardwalk made him look up. There were 5 of them, riding out a walk, abreast, indifferent to the blazing midday sun, dry mud-colored dusters, Stetsons pulled low, Winchesters resting in saddle scabbards. The horses were breathing heavy, caked in white lather. They'd been pushed hard for days. The folks of Red Creek, miners, shopkeepers, a few dirt farmers, seemed to just melt away. The street emptied in the blink of an eye. Only a tumbleweed lazily rolled past the crooked sign of the Blind Mule Saloon. Silas wiped the sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. His eyes locked onto the leader, a large man on a black stallion with silver conchos on his saddle. Harlan Crow, a man who had a chunk of cold lead where his heart should be. Silas knew him all too well. 15 years ago, they'd burned ranches together down on the southern border, until Silas realized blood doesn't wash off with whiskey and rode out into the night, leaving the gang behind. The outlaws dismounted at the saloon. One of them, a scrawny kid with shifty eyes, kicked a sleeping dog on the porch. The mutt yelped and scrambled into the dust. Crow pushed through the bat-wing doors and the 5 of them vanished inside. Silas returned to his anvil. Not your fight, he told himself. You're dead. The man with 2 colts tied to his thighs died in Sonora. He raised the hammer again. A strike, another strike. The ring of steel was supposed to drown out the rising dread, but instead, Silas only heard the silence hanging over the town. The silence shattered 10 minutes later. The sound of breaking glass, a woman's scream, and coarse laughter spilled from the saloon. Then the doors burst open, and a man was thrown out into the dusty street. It was Eli, Red Creek's young sheriff. Barely 22. The tin star in his chest was ordered from a Sears catalog, and he only ever drew his iron to shoot tin cans out behind the livery. Eli struggled to his knees, wiping blood from a split lip. Harlan Crow stepped onto the porch, taking his sweet time lighting a cigar. The rest of the pack grinned behind him. I said we'll drink what you have and take what we want, boy, Crow rasped, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke. Now you go tell the mayor to get us fresh mounts and $1,000. For the inconvenience, you can't just ride in here. Eli's voice shook, but he stubbornly climbed to his feet. His hand hovered unsteadily over his holster. You're under arrest for... A dry, cracking whip snap echoed. Silas froze. He hadn't even seen Crow clear leather. Eli was thrown backward. A dark stain began to blossom on his light shirt, just below his ribs. The kid crumpled into the dust, clutching his gut. He didn't scream, just gasped for air with a wet, wheezing sound. Anybody else want to discuss the law? Crow asked loudly, his eyes sweeping over the shuttered windows. The only answer was the howling wind. Crow smirked, holstered his piece, and lazily kicked a wooden post. You got 1 hour. Then we start burning this coop down, house by house. Silas stood in the shadows of his forge. His breathing was steady, but an abyss had opened up inside him. He closed his eyes. The face of his wife, Maria, who had died of a fever 5 years ago, floated into his mind. Promise me, Si. No more blood, her lips whispered. Sorry, Mary, Silas whispered hoarsely into the void. Looks like the plow iron will have to wait. He turned and walked into the small lean-to behind the forge where he lived. It smelled of old wood and dried herbs. Silas dropped to his knees by the cot, pried up a floorboard with his knife, and pulled back a piece of oiled canvas. When he unwrapped it, the room seemed to grow colder. 2 Colt .45 single-action armies, grips made of aged ivory. The metal gleamed dully, recognizing its master. Beside them lay a wide leather gun belt slotted with tarnished brass cartridges. Silas picked up one of the revolvers. The weight of the iron in his hand was painfully familiar, like an extension of his own flesh. His fingers, gnarled from arthritis and blacksmithing, suddenly stopped aching. They wrapped around the grip with surgical precision. He checked the cylinders, squeezed a drop of gun oil onto the action. The ritual of loading was a meditation. Click, load, turn. Click, load, turn. 5 rounds in each. Hammer always rests on an empty chamber, the habit of a man who doesn't want to shoot his own leg off riding a horse. He strapped on the rig, cinched the buckle tight. Over it, he threw his old, faded-to-gray canvas duster, concealing the iron. Stepping out of the forge, Silas squinted against the sun. The street was empty. Eli still lay in the dirt, his breathing ragged, a puddle of thick, dark blood pooling around him. Silas walked past the boy without stopping. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just a cold, dead emptiness. The emptiness of a man going to work. The outlaws were lounging on the saloon porch. 3 were passing a whiskey bottle around, while the scrawny one cleaned his fingernails with a massive Bowie knife. Harlan Crow sat in a rocking chair, his boots propped up on the railing. Hearing heavy bootsteps, Crow lazily turned his head. He squinted at the lone figure in the gray duster, walking dead center down the street. Silas's boots kicked up little clouds of red dust. "Hey, old man," one of the outlaws yelled, wiping sweat from his brow. "You tired of living? Crawl back into your hole." Silas stopped 30 paces from the porch. The wind tugged at the hem of his coat, revealing the worn leather of the gun belt for a split second. Crow slowly took his boots off the rail. His eyes widened. He leaned forward, peering at the deeply lined face beneath the brim of the hat. "Well, I'll be damned," Crow whispered. Then he stood to his full, towering height. "I thought you died in a ditch down in New Mexico." Silas stoned. "Word was you drank yourself to death or caught the cholera." "I did die." "Harlan," Silas's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like broken glass. "I just forgot to lie down." The gang tensed. The name Silas Stone still carried weight among those who rode on the wrong side of the law. The scrawny kid froze with his knife. "You got old, Si." Crow offered a crooked grin, though his right hand was already hovering an inch from his holster. And judging by the look of it, became a blacksmith? Trying to shoo your way to redemption? This ain't your fight, old man. Get on a horse and ride. We won't touch you for old times' sake. You killed a boy, Harlan. He asked for it," barked one of the outlaws, taking a step toward the edge of the porch. "You're gonna take your horses," Silas continued, his tone dead flat. "And you're gonna ride out. Right now." Silence crashed down on the main drag of Red Creek. You could only hear the squeak of the blind mule sign and the buzzing of a fat fly over a puddle of spilled whiskey. It was those few seconds where time slows down to the consistency of molasses. A heartbeat. The wind shifting the dust. Crow spat. "Kill him," he ground out. Hell broke loose in a fraction of a second. Silas didn't think. Thinking gets you killed in a gunfight. Only muscle memory works, hammered in by years of blood and black powder. His hands swept under the duster with a speed that defied his age. The twin peacemakers cleared leather in perfect unison. Bang! Bang! 2 shots blended into one deafening roar. The scrawny kid with the knife jerked like he hit an invisible wall. The .45 slug tore straight through his chest, throwing him backward through the batwing doors. The second outlaw only managed to clear half his iron before Silas's second bullet pulverized his throat. He dropped to the planks, choking and gurgling. Crow and the remaining outlaw opened fire. Silas rolled out of the line of fire, kicking up a dust cloud. A wooden water trough behind him splintered, spraying water from incoming lead. Firing from one knee, Silas squeezed the trigger on his left Colt. The bullet blew the hat off the third outlaw, grazing his skull. The man howled, lost his footing, and started firing wild. One of his stray rounds bit into Silas's left shoulder, tearing canvas and flesh. He didn't even flinch. He thumbed back the hammer on his right. Bang. The third outlaw folded in half and went still on the porch steps. That left only Harlan Crow. Thick, bluish-black powder smoke blanketed the street. It smelled of sulfur, copper, and blood. Silas slowly stood up to his full height. His left arm hung useless at his side, blood running down his fingers, dripping onto his dusty boot. In his right hand, he held a smoking Colt, rock-steady. Through the smoke, he saw Harlan. He was leaning against the saloon wall, breathing heavy. A red stain was spreading across his gut. Silas had tagged him in the first chaotic volley. Crow was grinning, baring yellowed teeth. His revolver was still gripped tight in his fist. "You were always faster, Si," Crow wheezed, coughing up blood. "But you lost your edge. You didn't kill me on the first shot." "I didn't want you to die fast, Harlan." Crow let out a roar and brought his iron up for one last shot. Silas didn't even blink. He smoothly raised his arm, sighted, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet caught Harlan Crow dead center between the eyes. His head snapped back, the revolver slipped from his weakening fingers, and his massive body hit the boardwalk hard, kicking up a cloud of dust. Silence returned to Red Creek. This time, there was a ringing, deafening quiet in the aftermath of the thunder. Silas stood in the middle of the street, slowly lowering his guns. The smoke was clearing. He turned his head and looked at the windows of the buildings. The shutters began to timidly crack open. The frightened faces of miners, women, and old men peeked out from behind the curtains. They looked at the 4 dead men. They looked at the dead sheriff, Eli, and they looked at Silas. There was no gratitude in their eyes, no relief. There was only primal, paralyzing terror. To them, he wasn't a savior. He was a monster who had just proven he was better at killing than the other monsters. Silas let out a heavy sigh. He slid the hot revolvers back into their holsters. He clamped a hand over his bleeding shoulder and headed toward the forge. He needed to pack. An hour later, he rode out of town on his roan gelding. A small saddlebag with provisions and tools was tied to his rig. He didn't say goodbye. Nobody came out to see him off. Red Creek faded behind him, drowning in the evening shadows. Silas rode toward the mountains. The sun was setting, painting the peaks of the Rockies the color of fresh blood. The wind brought the smell of dust and dry sagebrush once again. The old blacksmith, who had never quite managed to bury the gunslinger, was riding off into nowhere. The plow iron would have to wait. The world was too full of wolves for the dogs to sleep peacefully.